Good morning, everybody. I think we got more people in outlying areas than we do in him. I reckon somebody may have to. Good to see everybody this morning. We are going to continue our study in Genesis. Before we do, let's have a prayer. God, we're thankful to you for the day you blessed us with. We thank you for the opportunity that we've had to assemble here to study from your word, to gain truths that you have put forth for us. We ask you to be with us as we study, that we'll have open minds and receptive hearts to the things that are taught here, and the things that are discussed, and that we may use these things to further the borders of your kingdom. In Christ's name, amen. So, we're on chapter 13 today. Today we're going to be talking about Abram and Lot. And we begin in verse 1 of chapter 13. It says, "And Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, to the south." Now you remember last week he got kicked out of Egypt, didn't he? What happened to cause him to get kicked out of Egypt? Anybody remember? So the way you could tell that what had happened was, you remember that as they were going into Egypt, they went to Egypt because of the famine, and as they were going in there, Abram had a very beautiful wife, didn't he? And he says, "Now look, here's what's going to happen. They're going to see how beautiful you are, and they're going to be laying up to kill me. Somebody's going to be laying in the gap for me, and they're going to take you, and you're going to be their wife. So won't you just tell them that you my sister, and then that way they won't kill me." Now, never mind the fact that they're going to want to take her anyway. So that's what they did. They concocted the thing, and it's good that this type of stuff is written into the Bible, isn't it? If it wasn't, what do you think, with all of what we know about Abraham, what do you think that we as humans would have a tendency to do? Would we have a tendency to put him up on a pedestal, pretty much in our minds almost to equal with God, wouldn't we? But the Bible's going to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that we can remember that Abram was a human just like we are. And we see right off of the bat that God is going to use Abram to make his purposes work. So we get to see all of the things that happened there, and that was a bad thing that Abram did. Was it the end of the world? No, it wouldn't. But he shouldn't have. He was just, God had just told him how he was going to bless him and how he was going to take care of him. But anyway, we see where he got kicked out of Egypt, so they're sending him. He moved on to the south. He said, now, in verse 2 it says, "Now Abram was very rich in livestock and silver and in gold." And God had blessed Abram very well, hadn't he? And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So we see here that Abram has left. He's gone back to where he originally was in Canaan. And he's called on the name of the Lord. Now, the Lord has a number of times restated this promise that he made to Abram, didn't he? A number of times. He continues to do that, and there's a time or two that Abram made an altar. So we know that Abram believed in God. But just like us, a lot of times, our faith is a work in progress, isn't it? I don't think any of us could say we are right where we need to be, because we're not. We're not going to be right where we need to be until we stand face to face with Jesus. We're continually learning, we're continually growing as long as we're on the face of this earth. And that's what's so beautiful about this, is that that's what the writer, through divine inspiration, is showing here, is that Abram is a work in progress. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left." Now, you could say, couldn't you, that Abram is taking on the role of peacemaker, isn't he? He didn't have to do it that way, but he is. So look what Lot does next. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. And that was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like the Garden of Eden, or the Garden of the Lord, I should say. Like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. So there's some things that we can gather from this. Yeah, I think that's what that's talking about there. No, he didn't do too bad, did he? Now, there's a couple of things that we need to think about with this. Now, the first thing we see is that, both Abram and Lot have vast amounts of stuff, don't they? They've both been very well blessed, and it could be too. We know God blessed them both, but there's also we look and we see how that Lot we know was Abram's nephew, right? Did we see that? This means yes. Yeah, we did see that, didn't we? All right. So that's, his dad was Haran. Haran died before they left the Ur of the Chaldees. And so Abram took Lot with him, didn't he? I think you can safely say that Abram kind of took Lot under his wing, didn't he? Kind of like a son. Because at this point, Abram had no children. So I think it's very safe to say that Lot was kind of like a son to Abram. And, you know, I would say that meant that Abram probably loved Lot a lot, quite a bit. Perhaps Abram had even given some of his riches to Lot to kind of help him get his start. The Bible doesn't say that that's what he did, but it's certainly not beyond the realm of thought possibility that occurred. So now both of these guys had so much, specifically in livestock, together, that they were having a lot of strife between them, primarily between their various herdsmen. They were having strife over grazing areas, over watering areas. And Abram saw that was not good. That they didn't need to have that kind of strife with them. Remember, Lot was like a son to Abram. He loved him. And the last thing he wanted was to have strife between himself, between Lot. So he came up with this thing and said, look, this land can't support both of us. So we need to separate. Now, what would have been the custom, you think, back then, at that time, when a situation like that arose?
The true son could have chose.
Well, before we get to that point, what was kind of running through my mind was that Abram, because he was the patriarch of the family, would have been by rights the one who would have chosen to go to the best place. You know, could very easily say, Lot, I hate that it's come to it, buddy, but you got to go. I'm going to take the best spot for my stuff. And wouldn't that be a human reaction too? I'm gonna pick the best thing because my cows have got to eat. Is that what Abram did? Abram said, no. Tell you what, the whole land is before us. Everything. Far as you can see. So he said, I tell you what, you look, you decide. If you go east, I'll go west. vice versa. You tell me where you want to go, I'll go the other way. So what did Lot do in that instance?
Made a bad choice.
Yeah, he did. He really did make a bad choice. And on several fronts, as a matter of fact.
I wonder if Lot knew beforehand what was the Sodom and they were just evil people. You know, I find it hard to believe that he would just chose those people, you know, by not knowing them.
That's a good point, Tony. Steve?
Again, in Genesis 13:1, Abram went up out of Egypt and his wife, all that he had, and Lot went with him into the south, so he went south.
Yeah. Steve?
Later on, we learned that Lot's wife was very much attached to
Yeah,
that
she was.
area. So there may have been some influence from the wife
Could be.
about where to head.
You're right. There could have been some of that.
Possibly, I mean, that could be a tie-in there. So.
Yeah. That's very possible. I think, you know, we talked about he made some bad choices on a couple of fronts. First thing was, he was the youngster here. And this is in how my brain runs. He should never have chosen the better stuff for himself over his uncle. His uncle that took him in, perhaps helped raise him. I don't know how old Lot was when Haran died, but perhaps he helped raise him, made him like his son, perhaps even gave him a bunch of things. But he's going to take the best for himself. Now, that just don't... That kind of makes my stomach want to curdle a little bit. That's just not right. Not only do we have that part, but we know how in verse 13, but the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. We know specifically two cities that were there that were very evil, Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're going to talk, he's talking specifically here about Sodom. Apparently Sodom and Gomorrah, I think, were relatively kind of close in proximity. But, so, Lot chose what looked the best, didn't he? What looked the best was this well-watered plain. I got all this livestock here. They got to eat. They got to have water. I want the good ground. I want the good grazing ground. What he wasn't paying attention to, they had to know what the people of Sodom were like. I mean, there's no way they could just have not known that. There you go. Could have been. Yep. So Lot picks that. Could it been too, Lot thought in his mind, I ain't going to the city. I'm gonna be on the countryside. They ain't gonna have nothing to do with me. They're not gonna sway me one way or the other. I think that might have been a thought.
Lot wound up inside the city, right?
Exactly, that was my next point. In just another chapter or so, we're gonna find out he done moved to town.
And Abraham was out in the country.
Yeah, exactly. So Lot's thing was the only thing he saw was what his eyes were seeing. He saw this well-watered plain. He didn't see all this evil that was around. He didn't see that, hey, you know what? I do not need my family exposed to this at all. I know it's better ground. I know it's probably got better water. But I don't need to have my family exposed to this. No, he saw what a lot of people see. Irma Bombeck one time wrote in her book, "The grass is always greener over the septic tank." Would that be true in this instance? The grass was greener over the septic tank. Because that's what Sodom was. It was a large cesspool of evil. So, how many times do we allow things that we see today to sometimes cause us to make a poor decision, make poor judgments and things? Is that a thing even today that we sometimes do as humans? You know, we see and isn't that how sin is? Isn't that what sin looks like? We see the part that you see is the glittery, beautiful gold stuff. But what's inside of it is rot. And that's exactly what Lot saw here. Lot saw the beautiful part and did not see the evil that awaited. So much so that later on we're going to see that he moved into town, got him a house there. That'll be another story for another day. So yeah, we see how Lot made a bad decision. Was that Abraham's fault? Did he make that decision? No, it wasn't. He said, you go anywhere you want to go. And wherever you don't go, I'll go. That's how we're tempted. So they separated. Lot went his way. He picked up all of his stuff and he headed toward Sodom. We're going to have plenty of grass to eat. In verse 14, and the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever. So God is reinforcing his promise that he made to Abram, isn't he? Now, why do you think God was so quick to jump in here and say, hey, Abram, look at all of this? Was not Lot a part of Abram's life? Now he's gone. They didn't have cell phones. He couldn't pick up and say, hey, I'm gonna shoot Lot a text and see how he's doing. No, that's not how that worked. This was days' journey, perhaps several days, to go from one point to another like that. He couldn't call him. He didn't even have a landline. I'm not sure they even did smoke signals back then. Maybe they did. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that this nephew of Abram's that he loved, that he probably regarded like a son, is gone now. So Abram probably, how you think Abram felt about that? Could it be that, sometimes when we do the right thing, we still don't feel good, do we? It was the right thing. It had to be done. But I still don't feel good that I had to do it. I'm sure Abram was not jumping up and down because Lot was gone now. Could it be that it kind of left an empty place in Abram's mind? He had this fellowship with his nephew.
It make you feel guilty.
Maybe so. Could be. It could very well be that he might have felt guilty about having to do that. We know all of the emotions that run through a mind when we have things like that happen. Even though Abram could have very well justified and said, I gave Lot the best. And he did allow Lot to choose for himself. But I'm sure it still left him with a certain amount of emptiness. And I feel like maybe God knew that too. So God told him, says, look in all directions, as far as you can see. That's the land I'm giving you. And you know what it included? It included where Lot went. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants could also be numbered. God reinforced his promise to Abram. He lifted up to encourage Abram. God told him, said, arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I will give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and he built an altar there to the Lord. So we see here where God needed to reinforce Abram. The scripture doesn't tell us this, but we know that Abram probably kind of felt kind of low. We just talked about that. So God told him, look at everything. That's what I'm giving you, as far as you can see. North, south, east, west. Then he told him, go walk. The length of the land, the width of the land, it's all yours. Yours and your descendants. Kind of kind of like back in the days when you would walk what you owned. Some people it'd take a little longer than others. Some of us it wouldn't take but a minute or two. But that was a kind of a sign of ownership then, was to walk the width and breadth of your land. Now, what do we see from that? What do we see as opposed to what Lot saw? Lot saw the pretty green grass, and that's all he saw. Abram was able to look at that more through what God just told him. That where you stand and everywhere around is going to be yours and your descendants' land. Go look at it. And look what Abram did as he began to move about. He made another altar to the Lord. He expressed true gratitude to God for what he's done for him. He expressed, that was an expression, I think, of faith. Does it look like his faith is growing? I think it does. I think it really does.
You know, Ken, the theme keeps going through and through and through. We hear about the one guy, and he worships God, he puts an altar, does this, and then the other guy, nothing.
Yeah.
One guy does this for God, the other guy does nothing. Nothing is recorded of him giving any homage to God at all.
Right. That's right.
So, no thanks, no nothing.
So
Starting to play
you can kind of figure how the story's going to play out, aren't you? You sure can. Now, for a few minutes, let's look at a couple of other things here. Can blessings be dangerous?
Yes.
How so?
If you don't know how to control them, they will backlash on you.
All right. Is that possibly something we see go playing out here?
And two, it's like Lot look for instant gratification.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Instead of an investment, if you will, something down the road, right?
I like what Steve said. I think it was like,
Could sure be. It sure could be. Kind of like, well, I guess that's kind of been a thing all along. You know, Adam blamed Eve, so. But, but, yeah, I mean, who's to say there wasn't some influence there? Sure.
had to be,
I mean,
Sometimes we take our blessings as something we earned or we deserve.
you know, we do that, don't we?
Look what I did.
Yeah. Look what I did. And then we kind of, you know, we're going to beat ourselves on the chest a little bit. I did this. Kind of like, do you remember the parable of the rich man? I think it's in Luke. He's like, man, I've been blessed with all this stuff, and I ain't got nowhere to put it. So I'm going to tear my barns down and build me some new ones and bigger ones, and I'm going to just take a life of ease from now on. What did God tell you? Tonight is the end. So,
Give no glory to me, give no thanks to me.
right. So, our blessings come from God, And that is the thing that we need to center our minds on, is that blessings come from God. We see where if you don't have the right attitude here, you're gonna be in a jam the whole time. Look what you see sometimes, particularly with prominent families that have a tremendous amount of assets and wealth and so forth, and then the patriarch dies, and then the matriarch dies, and then they're all squabbling over everything. It's just money, and it's gonna be burned up, and we're
Just like
squabbling
the
over it.
Madoff family in the news.
Uh-huh.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Pass down, now it's nothing.
Now, yeah, and then that's the other part. They have these blessings, they pass these blessings down, and then they waste them. They don't give credit to God. So yes, blessings can be a danger if you don't know how to enjoy them, if you don't know how to handle them, if you don't know the purpose of blessings. One of the reasons that we're blessed is so that we can do what? Help others. Exactly. The Bible tells us that. But we gather it and we think we did it, and then we're going to hoard all of it. We see where these wealth and possessions can lead to strife. It can lead to strife in families. It can lead to strife with those around about us. And it all kind of stems from what's inside of us, isn't it? Isn't that where all that comes from?
Blessings are supposed to also help us grow spiritually.
Yeah, absolutely. We see too where those who walk by faith can be magnanimous peacemakers by their actions. So we shift the conversation back over to Abram, don't we? We see his faith. We see his faith where God had already told him that he was giving him all the land, him and his descendants, and that his descendants would be like the dust of the earth. That all the people of the earth would be blessed because of his descendants. And rather than continuing in the strife, Abram said, no, we don't need strife. It's not worth it. We need to make peace. We need to make peace between our families. And that's exactly what he did. The Hebrew words that kind of depicted what was going on here with this strife were the same ones that's used when in the wilderness when they had no water to drink, and it says that people tested God by their quarrel and their strife against Moses. It conveys the idea of a very strong dispute or strenuous contention. That was the kind of strife that was going on here. And admittedly, it was primarily initially the strife between the herdsmen of the two groups of men, which very possibly could have been, well, they were servants one way or the other of those two men. Some of them may have been slaves. I don't know. Some of them may have been hired people. But they had strife between them. And Abram was very quick to want to make that strife go away, to make peace come between their families again. And we can give him credit for that, can't we? Because of his faith and the kind of person that he is, that he did that. And if we walk by sight, how easy is it to be deceived and led into tragedy? Keep in mind, Lot, the only thing Lot could see was this well-watered plain. He didn't see all of the other things around there. Maybe it's because he didn't want to see, I don't know. But he couldn't see that. And we see where it led him into a place he didn't need to be. One of the things that we see in some later writings, that Lot was not specifically an evil person, was he? He was even, let's see, in 2 Peter, the 2nd chapter, in comparison to the people of Sodom, he was actually considered a righteous man, wasn't he? But he just made some bad decisions. And he made those bad decisions because of a divided heart. He was trying to serve God and wealth at the same time. And we see where that just didn't work out. So the one thing that we see here, to kind of sum up for the last minute or two, Abram's faith continues to grow, doesn't it? Abram's righteousness continues to grow. We see that from here. And we see also, we begin to see what bad decisions can do for you. Anybody else want the last word before we close out? Mike?
Yeah, the Bible clearly doesn't say, but are we to assume maybe climate change started about this time with the livestock?
That's very possible. That is very possible.
Also, you had mentioned the town of Ai.
Yeah.
That's not the last time that town.
No, it's not.
Because in Joshua,
Yes.
he had to come up against it again, and he got a little uppity there.
And somebody else made some bad decisions too, didn't they? Yep. All right. Well, that's all we got today at 9:15. Thank y'all for being here. And we'll go to chapter 14 next week.